What is going on, students? Welcome to NextGen Online. Whether this is your first time or your 3,822nd time, we are pumped that you have taken the time to be here. We're getting ready to hear an amazing message from Becky as we close out our series all on focus. But before we do that, we're going to hop into some worship with Trevor.
Oh, how high would I climb mountains if the mountains were where you hide? Oh, how far I'd scale the valleys if you graced the other side. Oh, how long have I chased rivers from lowly seas to where they rise against the rush of grace descending from the source of its supply. 'Cause in the highlands and the heartache, you're neither more or less inclined. I would search and stop at nothing, but you're just not that hard to find. Oh, I will praise you on the mountain. I will praise you in the mountains in my way. You're the summit where my feet are. So I will praise you in the valleys all the same. No less God within the shadows, no less faithful when the light leads me astray. You're the heaven where my heart is. In the highlands and the heartache all the same. Oh, oh, oh. Oh, how far beneath your glory does your kindness extend the path, from where your feet rest on the sunrise to where you sweep the sinner's past. You know how fast would you come running if just to shadow me through the night. Trace my steps through all my failures and walk me out the other side. For who could dare ascend that mountain, that valleyed hill called Calvary, but for the one I call Good Shepherd, who like a lamb was slain for me. Oh, I will praise you on the mountain. I will praise you in the mountains in my way. You're the summit where my feet are. So I will praise you in the valleys all the same. No less God within the shadow, no less faithful when the night leads me astray. You're the heaven where the heart is. In the highlands and the heartache all the same. Oh, oh, oh. Wherever I walk through, wherever I am, your name can move mountains. Wherever I stand, if ever I walk through the valley of death, I'll sing through the shadows my song of ascent. Whatever I walk through, wherever I am, your name can move mountains. Wherever I stand, if ever I walk through the valley of death, I'll sing through the shadows my song of ascent. My song of ascent. Oh, oh, oh. song of ascent. Oh, oh, from the bravest of all valleys come the pastures we call grace. A mighty river flowing upwards from a deep but empty grave. Ooh, I will praise you on the mountain. I will praise you in the mountains in my way. You're the summit where my feet are. So I will praise you in the valleys all the same. No less God within the shadows, no less faithful when the night leads me astray. You're the heaven where my heart is. In the highlands, in the heartache, all the same.
Have you guys ever been having a really, really great day until something amazing happens to somebody else, and all of a sudden your day that was so great is no longer so great? Like, here's what I mean. Maybe you studied really, really hard for that test that you had, and your teacher hands it back and you got a B+, and you're like, yes, all my hard work paying off. And then you look over and the jerk next to you got an A-. And all of a sudden, you're less proud of what you had just accomplished. And this doesn't just apply to like teenagers and adults. This isn't a problem that we have once we're grown up. It's a problem that we have from pretty much the time that we're born. I can remember being in 3rd grade and we were learning how to write cursive. I don't even know if they teach that anymore to you guys, but I loved learning cursive. I loved how the letters looked and how pretty they made my name look. And I was so proud of my cursive lettering. Until I glanced over at my friend Megan, and like her cursive G's were immaculate. They were perfectly curved, and I struggled with my cursive G's. So all of a sudden, even though I had been so proud and so happy, all of a sudden I now sucked at life because Megan's cursive G's were better than mine. We are so hardwired to play that comparison game. And I don't know why. Why do we feel like we need to be exactly like somebody else? Or that somebody else needs to be exactly like us? See, this whole idea of comparison is so tricky. And here's why. Because we feel like we have pretty good reason for wanting to be like someone, especially if they're an influencer for us or a role model to us. But here's where the problem comes in. The more we focus on wanting to be like that person, the less we can focus on what God wants for us and becoming the person that He wants us to be. So over these last 4 weeks, we have been learning how to fix our eyes on Jesus and asking the question, what are you looking at? And we've been using events from the life of the apostle or the disciple Peter. And Peter has shown us what it looks like when we lose focus of Jesus and start to lean into focusing on our character, our circumstances, our criticism. And tonight, Peter's going to show us a thing or two about this whole comparison game. So we're going to be in the book of John, the very last chapter, John chapter 21. And as you're reading through this, you're going to notice some very striking similarities to what we talked about on the very first week of this series, when we first met Peter, the fisherman, before he was Peter, the disciple. And I love it when the Bible does stuff like this. I'm a total Bible geek, and I don't think it's coincidence at all that these two scenarios are so similar. But one was at the beginning of Jesus' ministry, right, where things were just starting out. And the other, this one, is at the end of Jesus' ministry. So much at the end of his ministry that Jesus has already been crucified. He's already died. He's already been buried. He's already resurrected. all this stuff has just happened. So these disciples, they've been through it. Like, they are in the middle of this time of chaos and uncertainty in their lives. And they're just maybe looking for a little distraction, a little taste of normal. Can any of you guys relate to something like that? So Peter and some of these other disciples go with something that's so familiar to them. And they decide to go fishing. And here's where the similarities abound. It's some of the same people that we met in Luke chapter 5 when we first met Peter. They go and do the same thing. They go fishing. They are out all night long, just like they were in the book of Luke. They catch absolutely nothing, even though they're experienced fishermen, just like in the book of Luke. Suddenly, Jesus shows up and tells them counterintuitively to cast their nets on a different side of the boat. And just like in Luke, they haul in a miraculous catch of fish. And at that moment, Peter's like, oh my gosh, it's Jesus. So question, do you know when it's Jesus? Can you tell when it's Jesus showing up in your life? Can you tell when he is trying to get your attention? Well, Peter could. So he jumps out of the boat and he swims to shore, and he and the rest of the disciples that were there that day sit and they have breakfast with Jesus. And while they're having breakfast with Jesus, Jesus asks Peter the same question 3 times. He asks him, Peter, do you love me? And Peter says yes each time. And then each time Jesus publicly gives him this mission to do. Then feed my sheep. Take care of my lambs. He is giving him this charge publicly in front of all the other disciples. And here's another one of those Bible scenarios that I don't think is coincidence. Some people say that Jesus asks Peter this 3 times publicly because if you watched John's sermon last week, you'll know that Peter had just denied Jesus 3 times publicly. And so Jesus publicly now forgives Peter. He restores Peter, and he gives Peter this mission to do publicly in front of these other disciples. But then at some point, the conversation between Jesus and Peter turns a little bit more personal and a little bit more somber. Check out what it says right here in John chapter 21, verse 18. And it's a little strange, but check this out. Here's what it says. Jesus says, I tell you the truth. When you were young, you were able to do as you liked. You dressed yourself and you went wherever you wanted to go. But when you're old, you'll stretch out your hands and others will dress you and take you where you don't want to go. Jesus said this to let him know by what kind of death he would glorify God. Then Jesus told him, follow me. Now that stuff that Jesus is saying in verse 18 about dressing yourself and someone else taking you somewhere, that sounds a little weird translated into English, and I don't know what Jesus' actual words and his actual language were. But verse 19 makes it very clear that what Jesus is talking about there is that Peter is going to suffer and Peter is going to die. And then he just says, follow me. Can you imagine what is going on in Peter's head right now? Jesus had used those 2 words, follow me, when he first met Peter. Remember, he said, follow me and you will fish for men. And so Peter did. He followed Jesus and he walked alongside of him through this mission. And now Jesus is saying, follow me again, but he's not going to be around. And Peter's going to have to suffer and even die. So Peter does what any of us would probably do in that situation. And he starts playing the comparison game. And he turns and he points to that guy back there. Well, what about him? Now, remember what Jesus had just commissioned Peter to do. Do you remember? Jesus had just said, feed my lambs. Jesus had just entrusted Peter with what was most valuable to him, to take care of not literal lambs, but to take care of his followers, to be the person that they would look up to lead them on the path that Jesus had already started leading them. But Peter's focus is not there right now. Peter's focus is on, wait a minute, I'm going to have to suffer? Is everybody else going to have to suffer too? Like, that's not fair if I'm the only one. What about everybody else? What about him? And he turns and points to John and asks, because Peter is so relatable, right? Don't we all have that moment where we want to know, especially when things are kind of uncertain, don't we want to know that the playing field is level for us? That we're not being singled out in some way? I remember when I was graduating from Bible college, I had this clear mission of what God wanted me to do, to go into ministry and to live my life for him and to do things, and I was so pumped about it. And then I started to look around at my other friends who were graduating, and they were getting engaged. And they had jobs lined up already in local churches or mission fields. And I started to question, well, what about me, God? Where's my fiance? Where's my church job? Where's my mission field? And I started to compare myself to other people, because don't we want to know that we line up, that the starting line is level before we even take a step forward? But listen to what it says in 2 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 12. It says this. This is going to smack some of you guys in the face. It says, when they measure themselves by one another and compare themselves with one another, they are without understanding. Some translations, in fact, the one that I'm actually reading out of, says, how ignorant they are. Guys, I don't want you all to be ignorant. I didn't want to be ignorant. But when we play that comparison game, that's what it does. And here's why. Because it takes our eyes off of the one who knows the perfect path for us, the one that we should be following. And that's why I love Jesus' response back to Peter. When Peter's running these scenarios in his head and he's like, what about everybody else? What about him? Jesus says, if what I have planned for him, he says in verse 22, what is that to you? As for you, follow me. As for you, follow me. But the problem is that it's so easy to see what everybody else is doing, right? It's so easy. You can pull out your phone right now in this very second, and you can see how fun somebody else's vacation is. You can see how trendy someone else's wardrobe is. You can see how cool all those friends are that are hanging out with them that aren't hanging out with you. And we fall down this pit of comparison. But here's the thing. Here's the good news. God never called us to compare ourselves to others. He never called us to try to be like someone else or want what they have or get to do what they get to do. In fact, it might be mentioned as one of the 10 commandments for something that we shouldn't do. God only calls us to follow Jesus. We haven't been called to follow anybody else, regardless of how cool they are. Our lives are not meant to look exactly like theirs. So, Jesus' response to you, just like it was to Peter. But what about what they have? What about what they get to do? What about who they are? What is that to you? As for you, follow me. So simple. So let me ask you this. When you catch yourself playing that comparison game, honestly ask yourself, do I really want to be more like them? Or do I want to be more like Jesus? Fix your eyes on Jesus and follow after him. And there are so many scriptures that give you insights into how to do that exactly. I want to share just one of them with you guys because I think it's so simply put, and I think it's so appropriately put for the world that we find ourselves living in right now. And it's what God says to do in Micah 6:8. You want to follow me? Here's how. Micah 6:8 says this. He has shown you. He has shown it to you. What is good and what he requires of you. And it's these three things. To act justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. To walk. Just to walk. Following after God and fixing your eyes on Jesus. So let me ask you, as we wrap up this series, to evaluate one more time and as honestly as you can, what is it that robs you of that focus? What takes your eyes off of Jesus and onto anything else? Honestly, is it for you? Is it your character, like we talked about that first week? Is it those things that you tell yourself about yourself? Is it your circumstances? Is it all the stuff that's going on around you? Is it your criticism? Is it the things that people say about you that may or may not be true? Or is it the comparison game? Is it wanting your path to be someone else's path? And let's commit to moving forward, fixing our eyes on Jesus and throwing that thing off, because at the end of the day, it's holding you back. So will you commit to throwing that off, fixing your eyes on Jesus, so that we can run that race that he has set out just for us? I love you guys, and we'll see you next time.
What an amazing message from Becky. We've taken 4 weeks to look at what it takes to stay focused on Jesus, even during times like this. Hey, don't forget, we got some amazing content coming out on Thursday. We'll see you then. Bye.